I would like to start by talking about the multipolar world and how it can shape the future of the world order.
We are actually living through a profound change in the world order. Such a change happens traditionally, like maybe once every 200 years, 150 years or so.
Hello, everyone. Today, I'm honored to have Mr. S.L. Kanthan. He's a columnist, blogger, and the host of the podcast Geopolitics Demystified on YouTube. So, Mr. S.L. Kanthan, thank you so much for your time and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Mr. Kanthan, I would like to start by talking about the multipolar world. So, I would like to start by asking you about the importance of multipolarity in the world system and how it can shape the future of the world order.
Okay. Yeah. So we are actually living through a profound change in the world order. Such a change happens traditionally, like maybe once every 200 years, 150 years or so, if you look at the last few centuries. And it's basically, it'll be the change in the order of who is the leading nation in the world. What sort of a system controls the world? What will be the global, the currency, and a whole bunch of geopolitical, military ramifications along with that. So, for example, if you look at the last, say, 500 years, like you had one empire after another. We had the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Dutch, the French, the British, and maybe you can even look at the Germany as like an empire for a short time. And then since World War One, and but definitely after World War Two, the U.S. became the empire. So it was number one in the world. The dollar became the global currency. The US had the biggest GDP, the biggest military, and all of the technology that we saw in the last 7 decades. Most of it came from the US in one form or another. So this is a very profound change. And if you look at the West, the West became the most powerful nations in the world for about 400, 500 years. And they were able to colonize the rest of the world, And you can see, like in our country, the British, the Portuguese, and they all came, the French. And they were like very small nations, right? If you look at the population, and they were so far away, but then Britain was able to conquer us and then to exploit us, and that's how these really small nations, they became very powerful. And then the power was very concentrated in just a few geographical locations. But now things are changing so rapidly, So when the Cold War ended in 1991, the U.S. Became the sole superpower. So during the Cold War, we had a bipolar environment with the Soviet Union and the U.S., and then that became the unipolar in starting in 1992, and the U.S. became the sole superpower, and a lot of Americans thought that that would last forever, and they had the formula. And if you read the books like, The End of History by Francis Fukuyama, and all these people, it really got to their head, and they could not see the rise of Asia, you know, And these Americans would visit India, China, Vietnam. They're like, oh my God, these people are so poor, so backward, and we are so far ahead, and we will stay that way. There's no way that these people could catch up. But then what happened, in like, for example, if you went back to 1993, 30 years ago, and if you compare the GDP of India, Japan, and Germany, so those two countries were seven times larger and 15 times larger than India. You know, so it seemed like, I mean, it's going to be impossible for India to catch up to Germany and Japan, who were seven times and 15 times larger. And now you fast forward 30 years, well, India had surpassed the UK, France, and now it's very close to Germany and Japan. So the IMF projection is by the end of 2027, in just 3 more years, India will be the number third largest economy in the world. Right? So things are changing rapidly in terms of GDP. There's no doubt about that. And then when like people are always like, but still, well, India is very poor in terms of GDP per capita. Yes, 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 it's true. In terms of GDP per capita, we're still poor, but the collective GDP matters, because that determines the spending power of a nation, and that determines the size of the middle class. So if you look at the number of Indians who own motorbikes and cars and laptops and smartphones now versus 30 years ago, there's a huge difference, right? So we might be a poor country in terms of GDP per capita, but if you look at the fraction of the people who are the rising, the middle class, that makes a huge difference in terms of the smart people who can go to college, who can do startups, who can innovate, who can go to the U.S. and be successful, and the spending power, and the government's spending power, the military, So that becomes larger and larger. So when that happens, then it's not just the GDP, but in terms of the manufacturing, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the diplomatic power, geopolitical power, military power, everything shifts to the East, and especially to Asia, right? So that's why, so this is going to be the Asian century, you know? So yeah, the British, the French, the Portuguese, they all came and conquered us a couple of centuries ago. But now, can you like imagine that happen? No, you know. So now there's no way the British or the French can come and take over our land or be able to rule us. So the power system has changed enormously, and now you can see the poor people from India can become the CEOs of Google, Microsoft. They can become the chief of the World Bank. They can become the directors at the IMF. So these are profound changes, and also psychologically, right? So like if you went and talked to a child in India in 1993, and you asked him, "Hey, can you become a CEO of Microsoft?" You'd be like, no, I'll be so happy to just get a small job with Microsoft, right? But now you talk to the kids, they can be like, yeah, so I can become the leader of the UK. I can become the leader of the richest corporation in the world. So this psychological boost, it also makes a huge difference because then people are more confident about what they can do and the way they present themselves, the way they view themselves, and what they want out of life. Uh, that changes, and then boom, like we are no longer willing to bow to the so-called superpowers. So that is the concept of the multipolar world, but it's not just about India. So, like, well, like you can take a look at the African nations. They're also going to grow very, very fast, and then you look at Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan. I mean, but Thailand and China, of course. Um, so all these countries, and now okay, now you see like they all want to join the BRICS. So BRICS used to be just 5 countries, and then this year 5 more countries joined, and now we have 30 to 40 more countries who want to join BRICS. So they all have a new vision. They want to get out of the domination by the U.S. They're like, why should we have to use the dollar? Why do we have to bow to the U.S.? Why does the U.S. have to set all the standards? So, but the transition won't be that easy, right? So, the U.S. Might have been a friend of us when we were poor, and as we start to become rich, we are going to clash with the U.S. And they will try to contain us, to hobble, to shoot us in the knee, to slow us down. And we can see what they did in Bangladesh, right? Just a few days ago, the U.S. So the U.S. still has that. The inertia. So it's not going to be just like, you know, one day the U.S. will be lost as the superpower. It will be a slow decline. You know. So if you look at the British, they lost the empire right after World War II, and then they lost India in 1947. But it was not the end of the British Empire or the prosperity right away. And the British pound, it was still strong for like another 15 years or so. And now Britain is in a very, very sad state. There's a lot of poverty, and you can see the civil war sort of a stuff happening in the UK. There are a lot of bad things happening in the UK. And if you look at the British Navy, which once used to rule the world, they only have something like 30,000 people in the British Navy. It's actually a smaller than it was like 200 years ago. So that empire is gone, right? The British Empire. And look at Portugal, right? When was the last time will anybody even spoke about Portugal anymore? But they once were so strong, they had the empires all over the world, right? They conquered South America, they came to India, they conquered some in the large parts of the African countries, blah blah. So the U.S. is going to decline. So it's already declining slowly. There are lots of statistics you can look at the U.S. Um, and you can see a lot of Americans are suffering. And somebody like Trump had to say, "We will make America great again." Right? So that itself shows that America is not great anymore. And so they will decline slowly, but they're not going to go down peacefully. So if you look at the Soviet Union, at some point they realized, okay, you know, we cannot have the Soviet Union, the empire anymore. And they were like one of the rare situations where a large empire peacefully dissolved itself, right? And the US is not going to do that. The US is not going to say, okay, we're going to shut down the military bases everywhere. We will stop doing the coups, and will be a brand new America, more humble and peaceful. No, they're going to fight very hard. They're going to try to start a war with China. So we'll see what happens, you know. So that would be like, I mean, it'll be a test for the wisdom of the global South, the Asian countries, to not to fall for the trap of the U.S. empire and the globalists. That is the big picture of the multipolar world, and then we have to see how the transition happens.
It's interesting you gave this explanation of how the multipolar world has evolved. So, I want to ask you about the collective decline of the West. We can see that the West is declining in terms of economic strength. There's a lot of increasing illegal immigration, poverty, and the populations are aging as well. So, what one factor do you think, or is it multiple factors that is leading to the collective decline of the West?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, and there can be so many answers depending on who you talk to. So the two things I would say, one is the financialization of the Western economy, where they uh, moved away from manufacturing, and they focused way too much on services and financialize everything. So, uh, because once they started to move the manufacturing away, they were like, oh, so now how do we create jobs? And then it became a lot of, fluff jobs, like services. And then they start to financialize everything. So, for example, say like, the real estate and the housing, rather than focusing on building more homes, they deliberately kept the supply of the houses down, and then it became like the casino. Then you buy a house, you sell a house, you made $50,000, and then they kept manipulating the mortgage rates, and that's what led to the 2008 financial crisis. But they still don't learn. So they go, oh, the US stock market is 45, $50 trillion, but it's all fake money. They borrow their own shares, and then they boost the prices, which doesn't even make sense. And that used to be illegal until the 1980s. So they changed the laws that allowed them to do stock buybacks, and then they, financialized the education. So rather than focusing on providing cheap college education to students, it became a financialized thing. So now the Americans have something like $1.7 trillion of student debt. It's a stupid way to live life, and they don't save money. They just charge it to the credit card, the debt. So it's very So they financialize everything. They financialize the healthcare. So if you financialize something, then profit becomes the number one goal. You know, so if you financialize the healthcare, you don't want the population to be healthy. You don't want a cure for a disease, because you look at um, people as potential sources of the income. You know, so you know, so they want people to be fat, and they want people to have diabetes, and they don't want the cure for diabetes. They want the person to take a diabetes medication for the next 40 years, because that's a good financial model. Hey, this is like great revenue, we keep coming up. So well, everything is so warped, right? And if it's financialized, then you don't care if people become drug addicts, if people have broken families, and that would actually be good, like, because the husband and the wife, they break up, and now they need two apartments rather than one. They need to buy twice as many furnitures. So that's all good for the business, right? So the financialization is number one, and then the breakdown of the morality and the family values. So you know, so you see, like, how in the American culture, they have a record number, the rate of suicides right now. So last year, the suicide rate in the US was the highest since the Great Depression, right? In the 1930s, when the US economy was just like broke, and the whole country looked like, a fourth world country. There was no hope. So, how could that be when they have a $28 trillion of GDP, but they have the highest suicide rate in 75, 80 years? And the homelessness. Whatever city you go to in the US, you'll find so many homeless people on the streets, on the sidewalks. You don't even find that like in India, you know. So if you live in Bangalore, you will rarely see a homeless person. And then you go to New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, blah, blah. There are like huge camps, thousands and thousands of homeless people, drug addiction. So this failure of the moral values, and they don't even care when they, financialize the news. Then all you care is the clicks, right? So you don't want the truth. You just want web traffic. You want to be, you know, uh, so fake news is more profitable than smart news or the facts. And then you have politicians. They financialized politics. So politicians are not really taking care of Americans, the average American. They're just for sale. So they tell the lobbyists, if you give me, $500,000, if you give my wife a nice job in the board of directors with $1 million a year for doing nothing, then I will vote the way you want. So this the loss of morality, traditional values, good the cultural values, and all of this have led to the huge decline.
That was a very good explanation of how the West has declined over the years.